I never planned to move back in with my grandfather. At 32 years old, living with an elderly relative was not exactly the triumphant midlife scenario I had envisioned for myself. But after the tech startup I worked for collapsed overnight and my landlord doubled the rent on my apartment, I found myself with few options. Grandpa Martin had been living alone since Grandma passed 3 years ago, and the sprawling four-bedroom house had become too quiet for his liking. He welcomed me with open arms and a home-cooked pot roast that tasted exactly like childhood. The neighborhood seemed perfect at first glance. Maple trees lined the streets, casting dappled shadows across neatly maintained front yards. Children rode bicycles on the sidewalks while neighbors exchanged pleasantries over garden fences. In the golden glow of evening light, it looked like something from a real estate brochure advertising the American dream. Grandpa had purchased the house 30 years ago, long before the area had incorporated a homeowners association. The HOA had formed about 10 years back, according to Grandpa, but he had largely ignored their existence, considering them an annoying but ultimately harmless addition to neighborhood politics. That changed 4 months before my arrival when the previous HOA president retired, and a woman named Patricia Winters took over. I first encountered Patricia, whom everyone called Corinne behind her back, at the monthly HOA meeting Grandpa reluctantly attended. He insisted I come along, muttering something about strength in numbers. Corinne stood at the front of the community center meeting room, her platinum blonde hair shaped into an immaculate bob that never moved, even when she nodded emphatically. She wore a blue blazer with gold buttons and wielded her laser pointer like a weapon. "As we can see," she said, clicking to a PowerPoint slide showing a garage door painted navy blue instead of the approved slate gray, "noncompliance is becoming an epidemic in our community." Her voice carried the artificial sweetness of saccharin, leaving a bitter aftertaste. Property values suffer when individuals decide rules do not apply to them. After the meeting, she cornered us by the refreshment table. "Martin," she said, not offering her hand to shake, "I do not believe we have properly met, and this must be your grandson I have heard about." Her eyes scanned me from head to toe, making no effort to hide her assessment. Grandpa introduced me politely, but I noticed how his posture stiffened, his hand gripping his cane a bit tighter than usual. Something about this woman put him immediately on edge. The next morning, we found our first violation notice tucked into our screen door. "Grass exceeds maximum height of 3.5 inches. Please remedy within 48 hours to avoid fines." 2 days later, after Grandpa had mowed the lawn, another notice appeared. "Trash bins visible from street outside of designated collection periods." Then came citations for a bird feeder that apparently attracted nuisance wildlife, wind chimes that constituted noise pollution, and the small American flag Grandpa had displayed on our porch since serving in Vietnam. Each notice bore the same signature, Patricia Winters, HOA President, written in aggressive blue ink that sometimes tore through the paper. With each new complaint, I watched my grandfather shrink a little more. His shoulders hunched forward, and the proud set of his jaw gradually softened into resignation. At 86 years old, this proud electrical engineer who had once designed security systems for government buildings was being bullied in his own neighborhood. "Do not worry about it," he told me over breakfast after our sixth violation notice in 2 weeks. "She is looking for reactions. We will be model citizens." But I saw the toll it was taking. The light in his eyes dimmed with each envelope that appeared on our doorstep. This was not just about rules, it was about power and control, and Corinne was just getting started. The true focus of Corinne's obsession became clear on a Tuesday morning when a certified letter arrived demanding immediate attention to our non-compliant perimeter structure. The letter requested we replace our backyard fence within 30 days or face daily accumulating fines. I brought the letter to Grandpa, who sat in his workshop tinkering with an old radio. When he read it, his hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from anger. "This fence," he said, tapping the paper with one finger, "was built with my own two hands 27 years ago. Your grandmother helped me design it." The fence in question was admittedly unusual. Unlike the vinyl or wooden privacy fences that surrounded most yards in the neighborhood, ours was a custom creation. Metal posts anchored it to the ground at regular intervals, with horizontal metal bars connecting them. Between these bars ran artistic metalwork in geometric patterns that Grandma had sketched. In the sunlight, the metal elements created beautiful shadow patterns across our yard. "It is technically a partial privacy fence with decorative elements," Grandpa explained, leading me outside to inspect it. "But it is also much more than that." He ran his hand lovingly along one of the metal posts. "I designed it with multiple purposes in mind." The next day, we received another notice specifying the exact violations our fence committed. Height restrictions exceeded by 3 inches in certain sections, unapproved materials, and aesthetic inconsistency with neighborhood standards. This last point particularly infuriated Grandpa, who had been complimented countless times on the fence's unique beauty over the decades. "The fence predates their precious HOA by 17 years, he muttered, packing the kitchen with uncharacteristic agitation. "They cannot retroactively demand compliance for structures that existed before their rules." We attended the next HOA meeting, prepared to discuss the fence situation reasonably. Grandpa brought the original property documents and permits from when the fence was installed, but reason was not on the agenda that evening. Karen had prepared a special presentation titled "Neighborhood Eyesores and Safety Hazards," which featured multiple slides dedicated to our fence, complete with close-up photos highlighting what she called dangerous metal components and unstable structural elements. "This is a hazard to children who might climb on it," Karen announced to the room of 30 neighbors. "And frankly, it looks like something that belongs in an industrial zone, not our beautiful residential community." I felt my face burn with embarrassment and anger as Grandpa sat beside me, shoulders progressively slumping with each new accusatory slide. When he attempted to speak during the discussion period, Karen repeatedly cut him off with procedural objections. In the weeks that followed, we attempted to compromise on smaller HOA demands. Grandpa repainted our mailbox the approved forest green color. We removed the wind chimes and relocated the bird feeder to the backyard. I trimmed the hedges to exactly 3 feet in height and made sure our trash bins disappeared from sight within 30 minutes of garbage collection. But the fence remained our line in the sand. It represented too much Grandpa's craftsmanship, memories of Grandma, and frankly, our right to maintain structures that preceded the HOA's existence. Our attempt at compliance with smaller rules did nothing to deter Karen's fixation on the fence. Neighbors reported seeing her walking slowly past our house multiple times daily, taking notes and photographs. Then one morning in early April, I stepped outside to collect the newspaper and noticed something disturbing: muddy boot prints along our property line and visible damage to one section of fencing. Someone had been examining the fence up close, forcefully testing its stability. A decorative metal curl that Grandma had specifically designed was now bent out of shape. When I showed Grandpa, his expression hardened in a way I had never seen before. "This is trespassing," he said quietly, "and property damage." He stared across the street at Karen's immaculate colonial with its pristine white trim and precisely spaced flower pots. "This means war." "We need evidence," Grandpa declared that evening, pulling a dusty box from his workshop shelf. Inside were several small security cameras, leftover inventory from his days running an electrical security company. If she is coming onto our property, we need to document it. We spent the weekend installing cameras at strategic points around our yard. Grandpa might have been in his 80s, but his mind remained sharp as ever, particularly when it came to electrical systems. By Sunday evening, we had 4 cameras monitoring our property line, each one discreetly positioned and connected to Grandpa's old desktop computer. "Now we wait," he said, showing me how to access the footage remotely through my phone. The setup was surprisingly sophisticated for a man who still preferred physical newspapers to digital news. Our wait was not long. Tuesday afternoon, while Grandpa napped and I worked remotely from the dining room, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the security system. I opened the app to find Corinne Winters strutting purposefully along our fence line, measuring tape in hand. She wore gardening gloves and a wide-brimmed hat as if disguising her true purpose. For 20 minutes, she methodically measured each section of our fence, occasionally making notes on a clipboard and taking photos with her phone. At one point, she actually tested the sturdiness of a metal post by gripping it with both hands and shaking it vigorously. I recorded the entire episode and showed it to Grandpa when he woke up. His eyes narrowed as he watched Corinne's methodical inspection of our property. "She is gathering ammunition," he said grimly, "building a case against us." The next morning, armed with printed screenshots from our security footage, we walked across the street and knocked on Corinne's door. She answered wearing a tennis outfit, racket in hand as if we had interrupted her on the way to the country club. "Martin, what a surprise," she said without a hint of warmth in her voice. Her eyes flicked to the papers in my hand. "I was just heading out." "We will not take much of your time," Grandpa said politely. "We simply wanted to discuss your visit to our property yesterday afternoon." Her expression did not change, but I noticed her fingers tighten around the tennis racket handle. "I do not know what you are talking about." I held up the clearest image, Corinne reaching through our fence to measure the metal thickness with a caliper. "Our security cameras captured you on our property for 20 minutes yesterday, taking measurements, testing structural elements, all without permission." Corinne's artificial smile remained frozen in place. "As HOA president, I have every right to inspect potential violations. That fence is a community concern." "No," Grandpa said firmly. "You do not have the right to enter private property without permission. The HOA bylaws specifically state that inspections must be scheduled with homeowners present." "Your fence is not just unsightly, it is dangerous," Corinne said, dropping all pretense of pleasantry. "I have received multiple complaints about it." "From whom?" I challenged. She ignored my question. "Either that monstrosity comes down or the fines will start accumulating, daily." She checked her watch in an exaggerated gesture. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have a tennis match." 3 days later, a certified letter arrived from the HOA's attorney threatening legal action if we did not remove the fence within 30 days. The letter cited 14 separate bylaw violations and estimated potential daily fines of $200. Grandpa read the letter carefully, then filed it in a folder he had labeled HOA harassment. His calm demeanor concerned me more than anger would have. This was the resigned determination of a man who had faced bigger battles in his lifetime. Our security cameras captured 3 more instances of Corinne trespassing over the next week. Once she brought another HOA board member, pointing out supposed flaws in the fence's construction. Another time, she came alone with gardening shears, cutting back our plants that had grown near the fence. But the final straw came when we returned from grocery shopping to find an estimate for fence removal stapled to our front door, complete with a business card from Winter's Landscaping and Construction, apparently owned by Corinne's husband. That evening, Grandpa pounded his fist on our kitchen table with surprising force, causing the salt and pepper shakers to jump. 30 years I have lived here, he said, his voice low but intense. 30 years without incident. I will not be bullied out of my home by someone who moved in 5 years ago. The next day was Sunday, typically a quiet day in our neighborhood. Grandpa and I were enjoying coffee on the back patio when my phone buzzed with another security alert. The live feed showed Corinne approaching our fence wearing designer jeans and a floral blouse, clearly not dressed for yard work. She glanced furtively over her shoulder before reaching up and grasping the top rail of our fence. Then, to my utter disbelief, she hoisted herself up, her expensive shoes scraping against the metal as she attempted to peer into our backyard. Grandpa watched the footage, his expression unreadable. When Corinne finally lowered herself back to the ground and walked away, he turned to me with a glint in his eye I had not seen before. "I think," he said quietly, "it is time to tell you what makes our fence special." That evening, Grandpa led me into his workshop, a converted garage filled with workbenches, tools, and decades of electrical components organized in labeled bins. This was his sanctuary, where he still occasionally consulted on special projects despite being officially retired for 15 years. "Before I worked primarily on radios, I specialized in security systems," he explained, unlocking a cabinet I had never seen opened before. "Government buildings, high-security corporate facilities, even some military installations." He pulled out a thick binder filled with technical diagrams. "The fence I built was designed with multiple purposes in mind. Beauty, yes, for your grandmother. Durability, of course. But also—" He flipped to a specific page showing the internal structure of our fence. "Security." I leaned closer to examine the diagrams, not immediately understanding what I was seeing. The drawings showed the hollow interior of the metal posts and crossbeams, filled with wiring and small electronic components. The fence was designed with the capacity to carry a low-grade electrical current, Grandpa explained, his engineer's precision evident in the way he traced the circuit patterns with his finger. Similar to those used for livestock containment on farms, not enough to cause real harm but sufficient to deter intruders. "We had a break-in 2 years after moving here, and your grandmother never felt safe afterward. This was my solution." I stared at him in disbelief. "Our fence is electrified, has been this whole time." Grandpa shook his head. "No, no. The system has remained dormant for nearly 2 decades. After the neighborhood developed and crime rates dropped, we never needed to activate it. But all the components are still there, still functional with some minor updates." He pulled out another folder containing legal documents. "I researched extensively before installation. Electric fences are legal in residential areas with proper permits and warning signage. I have all the necessary paperwork." He tapped another document. "And the system was inspected and approved by the county. All of this predates the HOA, which means they cannot force its removal based on current bylaws." I sat down on his workshop stool trying to process this information. "So you want to turn on the electric fence to stop Corinne from trespassing?" "I want to protect our property," Grandpa clarified. "The shock is completely harmless, like touching a doorknob after walking across carpet in socks. Startling but not dangerous. And we would post proper warning signs, of course." My initial reaction was hesitation. "I do not know, Grandpa. What if someone gets hurt? A child or a pet could accidentally touch it." Grandpa pulled out another diagram. The system is sophisticated enough to allow selective activation. We can turn on only specific sections when necessary, and the current is significantly below anything that could cause actual harm. His voice softened. This is not about revenge, son. This is about boundaries, physical and metaphorical. Over the next few days, I researched local ordinances while Grandpa inspected and updated the fence's electrical components. He replaced weathered wiring, tested circuits, and recalibrated the system to ensure it operated at the lowest effective setting. I watched his hands move with practiced precision, realizing that this project had rekindled something in him: pride in his expertise, purpose in protecting our home. Our research confirmed what Grandpa already knew. Electric fences were legal in our county with proper permits, which we had, and visible warning signage, which we needed to install. The current had to remain below certain levels, which Grandpa assured me his system fell well under. The real question, Grandpa said as we discussed our plan over dinner, is not whether we can do this legally. We can. The question is whether we should. I considered everything Karen had put us through: the harassment, the property damage, the emotional toll on Grandpa. She has left us no choice, I finally said. She has been warned repeatedly about trespassing. She has damaged our property. She is trying to force us to remove a fence that has existed for nearly 3 decades. If she chooses to ignore warning signs and trespass again, well, that is her decision. The next morning, we posted large yellow warning signs every 6 feet along the fence. Caution, electric fence, in bold black letters. We made sure the signs were clearly visible from all angles of approach, with additional warnings about the voltage level and trespassing laws. As we finished installing the last sign, I noticed Karen watching us from her living room window across the street. Even from that distance, I could see her expression of disbelief and outrage forming. Grandpa noticed too and gave me a knowing look. "And now," he said quietly, "we prepare for the inevitable confrontation." Karen's reaction was swift and predictable. Within an hour of us installing the warning signs, she marched across the street, clipboard in hand and cell phone visibly recording. She stopped at our property line, careful not to step onto our lawn. "Electric fence," she practically sputtered, pointing at one of the warning signs. "This is absolutely not approved by the HOA. You cannot just electrify a fence in a residential neighborhood." Grandpa stepped forward calmly. "The electric capability has always been part of the fence design, Patricia. We have simply reactivated a dormant security feature and posted appropriate warnings as required by county regulations." He held up a folder. "All permits and approvals are in order, dating back to the original installation. Would you like to see them?" Karen ignored the offered documents. "I am calling an emergency HOA meeting about this. This is dangerous and forbidden by our covenants." "The fence predates your covenants," I reminded her. "Grandfather clauses protect existing structures." She glared at me before turning on her heel. "We will see about that," she called over her shoulder as she stormed back to her house. Once she was gone, Grandpa pulled a small device from his pocket, something resembling a garage door opener with additional buttons and a small digital display. "The remote control," he explained. "We can activate or deactivate specific sections of fence from up to 50 yards away." The system was more sophisticated than I had imagined. Grandpa had divided the fence into 6 zones, each independently controllable. The current intensity was also adjustable, though he had set all sections to the minimum effective level, enough to deliver an unpleasant but harmless shock. "We only turn it on when necessary," he explained, adjusting the dial to its lowest setting. This is about deterrence, not harm. To strengthen our position legally, we installed additional cameras to ensure complete coverage of our property line. Every angle was monitored and recorded, with footage automatically backed up to Grandpa's secure cloud storage. Another surprise from my octogenarian grandfather who still wrote checks for his utility bills. Over the next few days, we watched Karen's carefully orchestrated campaign unfold. She went door to door throughout the neighborhood, clearly attempting to rally support against our dangerous fence. From our front window, we could see her animated gestures and the concerned expressions of neighbors as she spoke to them. A petition appeared in the community newsletter, calling for immediate action against hazardous security measures, threatening neighborhood safety. Throughout it all, Grandpa remained remarkably calm. "She is building her case," he observed as we watched her activities from our kitchen window, gathering allies, creating public pressure. "Should we be worried?" I asked. "No," he said with quiet confidence. "We have followed every legal requirement. The truth is on our side." On Thursday afternoon, we received the expected certified letter announcing an emergency HOA meeting scheduled for Saturday morning to address urgent safety concerns regarding electrified perimeter structures. Karen had managed to convince enough board members to call the special session. That same evening, while checking our security camera feeds, I noticed something interesting. Karen closely examining our electric fence warning signs, then making a phone call while pointing at different sections of the fence. She appeared to be developing a plan. "I think she is going to make a move before the meeting," I told Grandpa, showing him the footage. "Trying to gather evidence or possibly remove the warning signs to strengthen her case." Grandpa nodded thoughtfully. "That would be consistent with her pattern. She wants to walk into that meeting with evidence that we are creating a hazard." We decided to prepare for this possibility. While we could have simply left the electrical system turned off until after the meeting, something about Karen's increasingly aggressive behavior concerned us both. The determined look in her eyes as she surveyed our property suggested she was planning something more significant than just taking photos. Our suspicions were confirmed Friday evening when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from our security system. The camera feed showed Karen approaching our fence line, her face set with determination. But this time, she carried something that made my heart race: a pair of bolt cutters, partially concealed in a canvas garden bag. "Grandpa," I called urgently, "I think you need to see this." He came quickly, remote control already in hand. We watched together as Karen surveyed the area, clearly checking to make sure no one was watching. Our cars were in the driveway. We had deliberately stayed home, but all house lights were off, giving the impression we might be sleeping or out for the evening. When Karen reached for the fence, Grandpa's finger hovered over the activation button. "Now we find out," he said quietly, "whether she respects boundaries or not." Through the security camera feed on my tablet, we watched Karen approach the fence with unmistakable purpose. She wore dark clothes, unusual for a woman typically dressed in bright colors and designer labels. The bolt cutters in her hand glinted dully in the fading evening light. First, she examined one of our warning signs, scoffing visibly before testing the metal with a cautious touch of her gloved hand. When nothing happened, we had not yet activated the system. Her confidence visibly grew. She moved along the perimeter, occasionally stopping to examine specific sections of fencing. "She is looking for the power source," Grandpa observed. "She thinks she can disable it." What Karen did not know was that each fence section had its own independent power cell, concealed within the hollow metal posts. There was no central box to disconnect, no single wire to cut. Grandpa's design was too sophisticated for simple sabotage. When she reached the corner post nearest to our side yard, the section furthest from streetlights and neighboring windows, she set down her bag and removed the bolt cutters. Her intention became clear. She planned to cut through part of the fence, either to damage it or to prove it was not actually electrified. "That section contains primary support wiring," Grandpa said, his voice tight with concern. "If she cuts through it improperly, she could damage the entire system." More concerning was the safety risk. While the fence current itself was harmless, cutting through live electrical wiring with metal tools carried genuine danger. "We need to stop her before someone gets hurt," I said. Grandpa nodded and raised the remote control. "Section 4, activate, minimum setting," he said clearly, pressing the corresponding button. A small green light illuminated on the device, indicating that the current was now flowing through the corner section where Karen stood poised with her bolt cutters. On screen, Karen reached forward, gripping the metal crossbar with her free hand to steady herself as she positioned the bolt cutters with the other. The moment her fingers closed around the metal, her body jerked backward as if pulled by an invisible force. The bolt cutters clattered to the concrete path below, and a sharp yelp, louder than expected, pierced the quiet evening air. Karen stumbled backwards, losing her balance completely and landing hard on the ground. Her expensive designer outfit could not protect her from the jolt of electricity that had coursed through her body. Though brief and harmless, the shock had clearly been effective. "Time to confront this directly," Grandpa said, already moving toward the front door. I followed close behind, bringing my tablet to continue recording the encounter. We stepped outside calmly, approaching Karen as she struggled to regain her composure. Her face was flushed with equal parts pain, shock, and humiliation. "Ms. Winters," Grandpa addressed her formally, "are you all right? You appear to have had an accident on our property." Karen scrambled to her feet, brushing dirt from her clothes with trembling hands. You assaulted me," she sputtered, pointing an accusatory finger at Grandpa. "Your fence electrocuted me." "You saw the warning signs," I said calmly, gesturing to the bright yellow placards positioned every 6 feet along the fence line. "The ones you were just examining, and you are trespassing on private property with what appears to be intent to damage." I glanced pointedly at the bolt cutters still lying on the ground. "I was conducting an inspection," Karen insisted, her voice rising to a pitch that caught the attention of several neighbors. Porch lights began switching on across the street. "As HOA president, I have every right." "No," Grandpa interrupted firmly but politely. "You do not have the right to enter private property without permission or to attempt destruction of personal property. The HOA bylaws are quite clear on that point." Karen's embarrassment quickly transformed into rage. She retrieved her bolt cutters with hands that still trembled slightly, backing toward the street. "This is assault," she shrieked, loud enough for the gathering neighbors to hear. "You deliberately set a trap." "We set up a security system on our own property and posted clear warnings," I countered, holding up my tablet to show her the video evidence we had been collecting. "Warnings you deliberately ignored while attempting to damage our property." "You will regret this," Karen threatened, pulling out her phone. "I am calling the police. The HOA will take your house for this. You cannot have dangerous electrical hazards in a residential neighborhood." As she retreated toward her home, several neighbors had emerged onto their front lawns, curious about the commotion. Karen played to this audience, loudly proclaiming her victimhood and the dangers posed by our illegal electric fence. Grandpa turned to address the gathering crowd. Our fence is fully compliant with county regulations and properly permitted, he explained in his steady voice. Anyone who respects private property boundaries and heeds clearly posted warning signs is in absolutely no danger. A murmur passed through the onlookers. I noticed several neighbors nodding in agreement, while others looked uncertainly between us and Corinne's retreating figure. As Corinne disappeared into her house, still shouting threats about legal action, I turned to Grandpa. Do you think she will actually call the police? He nodded solemnly. Yes, and that is exactly what we want. He patted the pocket containing a flash drive of our security footage. It is time all of this came to light properly. Within 20 minutes, 2 police cruisers pulled up outside our home, their lights painting the neighborhood in alternating red and blue. Corinne emerged from her house immediately, hurrying toward the officers before they could even approach our property. From our front porch, we watched her animated explanation, complete with dramatic gestures toward our fence and occasional points in our direction. "Ready?" Grandpa asked quietly. I nodded, feeling strangely calm despite the chaos unfolding. "Ready." The police officers approached our property with professional caution, one middle-aged with sergeant stripes, the other younger with a rookie's alertness. Corinne followed several paces behind, arms crossed triumphantly across her chest. "Good evening, officers," Grandpa greeted them respectfully. "We have been expecting you." The sergeant introduced himself and his partner, then explained they were responding to a complaint about an electrified fence causing injury. "We have extensive documentation ready for your review," I said, inviting them inside. Corinne attempted to follow, but the younger officer politely asked her to wait outside while they conducted their initial investigation. In our living room, I connected my tablet to our larger television screen, while Grandpa retrieved his permits and legal documents. For the next 20 minutes, we systematically presented the officers with our evidence. The original fence permits from decades ago, the county electrical inspection certificates, and most importantly, weeks of security footage showing Corinne's escalating campaign of harassment. The officers watched silently as the video montage played. Corinne trespassing repeatedly, measuring our fence without permission, damaging plants, tampering with fence components, and finally, her attempt that evening to cut through the fence with bolt cutters despite clearly visible warning signs. "The fence delivers a low-grade shock equivalent to static electricity," Grandpa explained, showing them the specifications. "Well below county safety limits and only activated when we have evidence of potential trespassing or vandalism. All sections are currently deactivated except for the one where the incident occurred." The sergeant reviewed our documentation carefully. "Your permits and warning signs appear to be in order," he acknowledged, "and the footage clearly shows trespassing and attempted vandalism." When they interviewed Corinne outside, her story began to unravel quickly. Her claim that she had no warning about the electric fence was immediately contradicted by our video showing her examining the warning signs minutes before the incident. Her insistence that she was conducting official HOA business fell apart when the officers asked to see HOA bylaws authorizing property damage. After nearly an hour of investigation, the sergeant returned to speak with us privately. "We're not filing any charges against you," he confirmed. "Your security measures are within legal limits, and you took appropriate precautions with warning signs." "And Ms. Winters?" I asked. "We've advised her that she could face charges for criminal trespassing and attempted property damage if you choose to pursue them. For now, we've issued her a formal warning." 2 days later, an emergency HOA meeting convened at the community center. The room was filled beyond capacity, with neighbors standing along the walls. Karen sat at the board table up front, a thick binder of evidence before her. She had arrived early, clearly planning to control the narrative. What she had not anticipated was how quickly information had spread through the neighborhood. Several residents had witnessed her confrontation with the police. Others had experienced their own conflicts with her selective enforcement of HOA rules. The dam of silence was breaking. When Karen attempted to present her case against our dangerous electric fence, something unexpected happened. Mr. Jenkins, a retired judge who rarely attended meetings, stood up from his seat in the back row. "Before we continue," he said in the authoritative voice of his former profession, "I would like to address the board about a pattern of harassment I have personally witnessed." One by one, neighbors began standing up, sharing their own stories of Karen's overreach and intimidation. The woman who received violations for her son's basketball hoop, while other homes on the street had identical ones. The elderly couple threatened with fines for their rose trellis that had stood for 15 years. The single mother given daily notices about her garbage can being visible while she worked night shifts at the hospital. Years of silent suffering erupted into public testimony. Through it all, Karen's face grew increasingly flushed, her objections weaker. When Grandpa finally spoke, the room fell silent. He did not attack Karen or raise his voice in anger. Instead, he simply presented the facts: our properly permitted fence, the documented trespassing, the property damage, and finally, the legal confirmation from local authorities that our security measures were appropriate. "This is not about a fence," he concluded quietly. "This is about respect for boundaries, for property rights, and for each other as neighbors." The HOA legal counsel, who had remained silent until then, confirmed that our electric fence was within our rights, especially given the documented trespassing. More significantly, he advised the board that Karen's actions had exposed the HOA to potential legal liability. The vote to remove Karen from the HOA board was nearly unanimous, with only Karen herself and her husband dissenting. As spring turned to summer, our neighborhood transformed. Under new leadership, the rigid HOA rules were reviewed and relaxed. Community gatherings replaced enforcement meetings. Children played freely again in front yards as neighbors chatted across driveways. My grandfather's fence stood proudly, its warning signs remaining as a precaution, though the electrical system was rarely activated now. It had become something of a local legend, the fence that sparked a revolution. One evening, as Grandpa and I sat on the porch swing watching fireflies rise from the lawn, he reflected on the experience. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "sometimes justice requires a shock to the system, both literally and figuratively." He chuckled at his own joke, eyes crinkling at the corners. "But what matters,"